Hello AI coders. Today I want to share an exciting new experiment I've been working on to integrate Ada more effectively with NotebookLM. As you might already know, NotebookLM has a massive context window, around 1 million tokens, making it perfect for analyzing large or entire repositories in one go. It's based on Gemini, and the best part is that NotebookLM's base version is completely free. However, transferring an entire repository into NotebookLM using Ada's standard copy context command can become tricky because NotebookLM only supports text or code from the clipboard, and there's a limit to how much you can paste at once. That's where my new pull request comes in, introducing a command called export context. With export context, you can export your attached files in a more organized way, either as individual files or in manageable chunks. This makes it a way easier to bring large portions of your code base into NotebookLM without hitting clipboard limits. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 3 real-world use cases of how you can use this new command to leverage NotebookLM's huge context window and streamline your development process. So let's dive in. All right, let's walk through a real-world example to show why NotebookLM's massive context window is so handy. Recently, I was checking out a feature request in the Ada Discord. Someone wanted the /copy command to support a numerical argument like 0, 1, or 3, so it can grab multiple previous messages instead of just the last one. Yeah, because by default, the /copy command only copies the most recent message, which isn't always enough. Okay, so let's say we want to find out which files are needed to implement that feature. Because the Ada repository is relatively small, we can copy the whole repository over to NotebookLM to find out which context is needed, and then we can use another AI assistant like Ada to implement that feature. Okay, so let's switch over to PyCharm, which I use here as my IDE of choice. I'm in the Ada directory here, and I start Ada without arguments. To add all files we need, the whole repository, so to say, to the chat context, we can use the /add feature. In contrast to /read-only, this one only adds the files that are in the Git repository. So if I would use /read, then it would also add external files, for example, the libraries, which we do not want here. So I click Enter. And now you see all files are attached to the context here. And now we use the /copy context command to copy all the files to the clipboard. Okay, now I jump over to my NotebookLM here, and I'm going to add source, copy text, and then I paste in what I have in the context. And now you see the problem. I'm not able to insert the code here because it's too much. I think NotebookLM allows around 10,000 lines of code to copy via the copy-paste functionality. So I need to chunk this somehow. And the other thing is, if I add the sources directly, it needs to be flat. So I can't add whole folders, and I can only add PDFs, websites, plain text files, videos, and so on. So I'm not able to upload Python files, for example. Okay, I also show you another handy way of grabbing the whole context of a repository. So you can use this with all GitHub repositories available. So you go to the URL here, in this case of the Ada repository, and then you just replace the G of GitHub with a U, like this. Click and then wait for a moment. Okay, and now you see the whole repository in an AI-friendly way. So I see first the tree structure here, and if I scroll down, I see all the files, the file path, and then the code itself with line numbers at the beginning. And here you see, for example, how many tokens we have here. At the moment, we have 50,000 tokens, and at the moment, it's limited. So not the whole source code is included here, but we are able to increase the value here. We can copy this and so on, or we can also change the format directly to text. Okay, and now I have the code here, and I can copy all, went over to NotebookLM, and paste the code here. And now we see we can insert it because it's not all of the code. We are now limited to 50,000 tokens. So that's also not what we want because we are missing stuff here. But this is also a way you can grab the content. Okay, so let's now use the new /export context command I implemented in this pull request. So again, go out of this instance here of Ada. And now I use the instance from my virtual environment from my dev version, which has embedded this PR. And now I do exactly the same. I type in /add and the glob pattern for including all Python files. So all Python files are included, and I say /. And now we see here 121 files are exported to a temporary directory here. Okay, and when we open this directory in file system, then we see also the output, the format. The export context command is creating a flat structure. So we have all files flat in one directory, and it's including the file path. As you see here, for example, this is Ada, coders, architect, prompt, py. And at the end, we have this .txt file extension, because as I said, you're only able to upload text files to NotebookLM. Okay, and now we can go to NotebookLM again, go to add sources, and now we can upload the sources here. So I go to my double commander here, and then I'm just drag and drop it over to here. Okay, and then you see it's loading all of the files here on the left side. One drawback is that it's summarizing the file contents. So at the end, on the left side, you only see a summarized description and not the file path anymore, which is a drawback because you do not know exactly what is behind of this description, which file. You need to go and click on it to find it out. That's a little bit bad in my opinion, but there's no way around it. Okay, and now I can ask my question. So for example, you can say, I want to implement this feature request, and then I just copy over the title from the Discord and also the description. And then I say, please give me a list of relevant files which I need to implement this. So let's wait for the response. Okay, so now it comes back with the files we need. So it says we need the commands py file, and then a description y, we need the io py file, history py, prompts py, and so on. It's describing some additional points like this. Okay, so we can now save this to a node and can use this file context to implement this feature with Ada. Okay, so the problem here could be that Gemini is looking at the whole repository at the moment. So it could be confusing if the repository is very big, then Gemini's answers could be poor. So it would be a better idea to chunk, or you can get better results if you chunk the whole repository and then just look into that chunks for getting an answer for the relevant files. That's what I'm showing you next. So for this, we are going back to Ada here. And then we say /export context, and then we add a chunking size at the end. Okay, so let's say we chunk this to 1,000 lines of code each chunk. Okay, and now you see we have 30 chunks, which is maybe a little bit too much. So I increase the count a little bit to, let's say, 2,000. Then we have 15 chunks. I go a little bit higher. Let's say 2,500 lines of code. Okay, and now we have 12 chunks. Yeah, let's maybe use this. For me, it sounds like a good number. Okay, so now I upload again these files here. Okay, and so the export looks like this. You always have the starting file. So for example, the first chunk starts with test basic, test watch py, and the last file inside of the chunks is Ada, coders, and the init py file. And we have here the chunks. It's not at the moment ordered by this, but you see this is chunk 1, chunk 2, 3, and so on. So we have now the 13 chunks, and I now copy it over to NotebookLM. I copy all and just drag and drop it to NotebookLM like this. And now we wait for the processing of the source files here, and it's also auto-summarizing it. Okay, so now I just copy in here the same question. Please give me a list of relevant files, but now I can go over the chunk. So I'm starting just investigating the first chunk here and fire the request. Okay, now I got back the answer, and I'm just going without concentrating on that answer. I just go through all the chunks and get all of the responses. So let me quickly do this. Okay, so now I went through all of the chunks, and if I scroll up, you see the responses of each. And now I just copy all of this to a reasoning model, for example, ChatGPT o1 Pro. And then I said, please give me a list of relevant files and a short description why they are important or by relevance. And then it thought for 2.5 minutes and it gave me back this list here. So it says, okay, the most important files are the commands py, base coder py, io py, history, test commands, and darks. Now I have the context I need to implement that feature. Okay, so this is a relatively small feature, and also the Ada code base is not the biggest one, but it's really useful to use NotebookLM with really big code bases. And if you maybe also have features which need to modify code in different places, then it's really a huge advantage to use this technique. Now, just for fun, let's check if we can one-shot this feature with the required determined context here. Now I'm in the Ada instance, and I describe the feature I want to implement in the /editor mode here. And I also copied over the hints from ChatGPT about the files. And then at the end, I said whether Ada is understanding my requirements and whether it is able to solve it with a confidence vote. And I asked about whether context is missing to avoid hallucinating. So let's fire up it. So I'm using O3 mini here with reasoning effort high, and it says, okay, these are the changes you need to do to implement the stuff. And then at the end, it summarizes it, and then it says, okay, I fully understand the requirement. The LM is very confident, 10 of 10, and no additional context is required to fulfill this. And then we say yes, click enter. So we want to let Sonnet run and implement our changes. I think I'm using Sonnet 3.7 here to implement this. So let's wait for the response. Okay, so let's now evaluate whether this works. So I open my Ada instance here, and then let's just create some history messages. So for example, I say something like respond only with, let's say, message 0. So I'm on here, 3.7. Okay, let's say we have 3 messages, message 0, 1, and 2, and then I make /copy. So it said copied 1 message to the clipboard, the last one, which is message 2. So I know if I say 0, should be the same. But if I want to get copied the message before, then I can write copy 1. Okay, now it's message 1, copy 2, and it's message 0. And I can also use something like 0, 1, 2. Then I copy this in the order, or I can also do it maybe the other way around. I can say 2, 1, 0. And then it's exactly the other way around. So this works like expected. But this was only a small or mid-sized repository. So now in the last sample, I want to switch to a really big repository and show you how to use this technique to grab the context to implement a feature. For our last sample, I decided to use Avalonia UI, which is a UI framework where you can use example files, which are usually used in the Windows presentation framework on Windows. You can bring that to other operating systems like Linux and Mac OS. Okay, it's a really big repository with a lot of files inside of it. You have 1,500 issues here, for example. You have also 27,000 stars and so on. So a really big code base. And I just randomly picked up one feature here. So I was just looking for labels of type feature, and I randomly picked that one because the description is short. I have also not really a deep experience with that project. I just want to show you how we can get the required context for implementing this feature, for example. And this feature is about implementing a way to access raw input devices states via the II input manager. And as I understand here, the problem is that if you, for example, want to get the pointer state after a button is pressed in that framework, then you are not able to access that information directly. Instead of this, you need to wait for events because the events contain the state, and then you can inherit the pointer state from that event, so to say. Okay, and yeah, they want to have direct access here. So this is the feature, and now let's see how we can use NotebookLM to get the required context to implement that feature. I cloned the repository in Rider, which is also made by JetBrains and my IDE of choice if I develop in C#. Okay, so this repository is based on the .NET framework, and the development language here is C#. If we look at the files inside of the Git repository, and then we see we have 3,500 files of type C# here. And the problem is I'm not able to send the whole repository to NotebookLM. It's just too big. So one way around here is to, instead of sending the whole files to NotebookLM, we can only send summarized outlines of each file. That would help us to stay in the context limit. The problem is that Ada does not support adding the outlines of files. And therefore, I recently added a draft pull request for adding read-only stub files. And that feature enables us to add the outline or summary of a file to the chat context. And because we need it here now, I just merged this branch into my dev version here to get used to it. So now I start my modified header here, and I do the same as usual. I add all files to the chat context here with add and then the glob pattern. Then you see it strings. You have a lot of files which are added now to the context, which also slows down Ada a little bit. And now we are finished. And yeah, Ada is a little bit slow now because we have so much files inside of the context. So we need to wait for some seconds. Okay, now it was responsible again, and I type in the /read-only stub command, which converts all of the attached editable files to the stub variant. So to only have outlines instead of the whole file content in the context. So now wait until this is done. Okay, so now it's done, and it has converted all of the files, as you see here, to the read-only stubs. And now we can export all the files via our export context command in a chunked manner. And now I use the /export context command with a chunk size of 5,000 lines of code. So let's see how many chunks this will create. Now it's finished, and it exported 16 chunks. And each chunk has 5,000 lines of code. That means in sum, we have 80,000 lines of code, which we now import to NotebookLM. If we look at the chunks here, then, for example, we see here, this is chunk 1. And we see here the first file inside of this chunk is the System Navigation Manager implementation.cs. And the last file in this chunk is the notification.cs under notification. And if you look into that file, then you see that it only contains outlines. For example, here, this is the System Navigation Manager implementation, CS, with the namespace and the interface. And if I scroll down, you see we have only the outlines of the methods here. So the implementation itself is hidden. Otherwise, it would be too big to paste this into NotebookLM. I open a new session or new project inside of NotebookLM, and then I just drag and drop over the files, the chunks, into this current project. And now the chunks are shifted to the left side. They are loaded. And as usual, NotebookLM will summarize it. And I'm not sure why the summarization, the description is always confronting challenges to mental health in the Black community. I don't know what's going on here with this description, but yeah, we can ignore this for now. Okay, and again, I'm going over all chunks. Every time only one chunk enabled, and ask the question about which files are relevant for the implementation of this feature, which I pasted in here. And yeah, I said, please list all files which are relevant to implement this feature. And I click on send message. I got back the answer here for this chunk. I then tick the next 5,000 lines of code chunk, disable the previous one, and re-ask the same question again. I got back the response, go to the next one, untick the previous one, do it again. And now I go over all chunks again and do the same stuff. Okay, so now I went over all chunks and got back the responses related to the relevance of the files included in the chunks. So I scroll up, you see all of the responses here. And the last message, I also asked about any idea how to implement this feature. And Gemini also gave me back some hints how to implement this. Then I copied over to ChatGPT. And if I scroll up here, I asked about to list all files ordered by relevance, and also including a short description why a file is important. And it came back with a file list. You see here the input manager, input device important, input root, and so on, with a short description why this file is important to implement that feature. And also it finishes with notes on an implementation approach. For example, it says that it's not publicly available everywhere, the input manager, so I need to expose it somehow and so on. But this is out of scope for now. I just want to show you how you can leverage NotebookLM to get the context and all files needed to implement a given feature. That wraps up our deep dive into using Ada's new export context command with NotebookLM. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this content helpful, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll be covering even more generative AI tips and professional software development best practices in the coming weeks. Have any questions or ideas for future videos? Drop a comment below and let me know. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.